Now, talking about the exemption permit in South Africa, to speak more on this, we're joined by Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda, the president of the African Diaspora Global Network. Thank you so much, Dr. Sibanda, for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good afternoon to your listeners.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure. Now, we're talking about the exemption permit in South Africa. We understand that the Helen Suzman Foundation and other parties were in court trying to stop the termination of the Zimbabwe exemption permit, and we're also aware of an ongoing litigation around this judgment that has been reserved. Do you see the government of South Africa being able to essentially end these permits in the absence of court analytic?
Well, the government endeavored to basically, end the permits, and so they have been stopped, obviously, in their tracks, by the court application or the litigation that has come up as a result of the various parties that you just mentioned. One of them being the Helen Suzman Foundation, to say, but the Zimbabwe exemption permit holders, they have got rights that constitutionally enshrined, which include that. If a decision that is going to affect them adversely has got to be made, they need to be consulted. And broadly speaking, that also NGOs need to be consulted, so that, they can say their view, because it's a decision that is in the public domain. And that affects, not only those right holders, but even children, and has got a broader impact on society. So the government did endeavor to basically end, the exemption permits without any further ado. But the court has now come in, and the court has got to make a decision, which is what is much awaited for this particular stage, where basically, we're hoping that the government, the courts will either, set aside, especially in terms of the final interdict or the final relief in terms of reviewing the decision of the Minister of Home Affairs, and in terms of the ZIF, prayers, which was basically an interim relief, to say, the government may not go ahead with the 30 June, deadline, but in fact it needs to extend, while least, their full application, rather Part B of their application is yet to be heard. But their Part B is obviously similar to the one done by Helen Suzman, and COMSA, except that obviously they may not argue, maybe on the same basis. But yeah, the government has tried to do that, and it has failed.
Okay, but Dr. Sibanda, this does not exactly solve the problem of those who have been affected, as the statistics show that over 170,000 Zimbabweans are relying on the ZEP to be in the country legally. But if we take a step back, the government of South Africa has always maintained that the permits were never meant to be permanent in the first place. What's your take on that?
Well, true. You see, when the government of South Africa says that the permanent was never meant to be, permanent, it was always going to come to an end. The legal question that really arises is that even if the initial permits or the 3 dispensations were issued to be less than 4 years in total, there is a mischief theory there that obviously, the lawyers did not clearly bring to a fore. The mischief being that the idea of issuing those permits for a 4-year period was try to interrupt the 5-year period, which ordinarily allows a person to apply for permanent residence. As much as Section 31, subsection 2 of the Immigration Act does say that the minister may give, rights of a permanent residence to certain, people. The issue is basically that this whole thing would have to cascade to the interpretation of statutes, where a decision would have to be made that, despite the disclaimer clauses that were made by the government of South Africa, have the holders of these permits not, in the meantime, gotten a better right, that is accrued as a result of, continued, residence. So when you look at permanent residence, it is basically based on ordinarily being resident in a particular, country. So if someone has resided for a period of 5 years, in basic legal terms, what it means is the person can now be regarded to be a resident of that place and to have terminated, the major relations with his country of origin. And that would allow him to have a choice to settle in the country where he is, where he has new relations, which can now be regarded as his home.
Right.
And other countries actually, years.
Okay, thank you so much, President of the African Diaspora Global Network, Dr. Vusumuzi Sibanda, for joining us on the news.
Thank you.